When most people think about the Ice Age, they picture a dramatic hunt, a mammoth in the distance, a few hunters rushing forward, and a spear landing at the last second. That did happen, and it mattered. But it was not what daily life felt like most of the time. Most days were slower, more careful, and more stressful in a different way. Because living near giant animals meant you had to solve problems before you even thought about dinner. You had to stay warm, avoid getting injured, protect children, keep fire going, and move through a land where one wrong step could put you too close to something large enough to kill you without even trying. If you want the real Ice Age story, you have to follow the hours that happen between the famous moments, because that is where people either survived or disappeared. The Ice Age was not just cold weather. It was a world where cold shaped everything you did and punished small mistakes quickly. Wind made open ground feel harsher, especially when it blew for hours without stopping. And the temperature could drop hard at night, even if the day seemed manageable. In many places, there were fewer trees than people expect, so fuel was not always easy to gather, and shelter materials could be limited too. Snow and ice also changed how fast you could travel and how far you could safely go, because moving slowly in the cold meant burning more energy, and burning more energy meant you needed more food, and food was never guaranteed. Now add the giant animals that shared this world with humans. Mammoths were not rare movie monsters. They were real animals that moved in groups and crossed huge distances. In parts of Eurasia, there were also woolly rhinoceroses, and meeting one up close was not something you wanted, because it could charge fast, and it had no reason to tolerate you. In other regions, large bison and wild horses could appear in numbers, and that was important because where large herbivores go, predators follow. Wolves were common, and big cats existed too, and they paid attention to the same herds that humans watched. This meant giant beasts shaped the entire environment around a camp, because they changed where humans could safely walk, where predators patrolled, and where danger might suddenly appear. A typical day often began with observation, not action, because you needed information more than you needed speed. Someone would look out from higher ground, if possible, and try to spot movement. But they also watched for signs that were easier to miss, like fresh tracks, churned snow, or an area where animals had recently grazed. This was not done for curiosity. It was done to avoid surprise. Getting too close to a herd could be deadly, and not always because the animals were aggressive, since a large animal can crush a person by stepping the wrong way in a panic. A sudden shift in wind could carry human scent, the herd could spook, and the safest plan could turn into a stampede. This is one of the daily challenges people rarely talk about, because it is not a heroic moment, but it is constant, which is the challenge of choosing routes that keep you out of the path of animals that weigh several tons, while still getting you to water, fuel, and food. Even when people wanted to hunt, they could not just run after the largest animal they saw. Hunting a giant animal was high risk, and it demanded planning, and planning required time, which meant deciding when to wait and when to move. A group had to think about where the herd was headed, whether the ground was safe to travel, whether snow was too deep for a chase, and whether they had enough daylight to do the job and still get back to shelter. They also had to think about the weakest point in the herd, because that could mean targeting a younger animal or focusing on one that was injured. And those choices were not made for drama. They were made because a healthy adult could fight back in ways people could not survive. When the environment is cold and injuries are hard to treat, you cannot afford a reckless plan, because a broken rib or a deep cut could end your season or your life, even if you bring home food that day. When a hunt succeeded, the danger did not end, it changed shape. A giant carcass was a valuable resource, but it was also a signal that drew attention from other animals. Predators and scavengers could smell blood, and birds could spot the sight from far away. And once birds gathered, other animals often followed. This created a new daily challenge that was mostly about speed and discipline, because people had to process the animal quickly while staying alert. Stone tools could cut and scrape, but working in cold conditions slowed you down, and hands that are stiff and numb do not move well. The group had to decide what to take first, and the smartest priority was usually the most calorie-dense parts, especially fat, because fat helps the body handle cold, and it provides energy more efficiently than lean meat alone. Hides mattered too, but hides required long work after the kill because they needed cleaning and scraping, and the group might not have the luxury of doing all that at the kill site if predators were getting close. Then came the hard part that sounds simple until you picture it, which was carrying the results home. A large animal provides far more than a person can transport in one trip, so people faced difficult choices. If they carried too much, they moved slowly and became vulnerable, especially if the weather shifted or predators followed their trail. If they carried too little, they wasted an opportunity that might not come again soon, and they still had to spend energy hunting again. If the kill was far from camp, the problem became more serious, because cold could preserve meat, but it could also freeze it in ways that made it harder to cut or cook later, and leaving parts behind meant other animals would claim them. This is why daily Ice Age life was filled with decisions that had no perfect answer, because every choice traded one risk for another, and a group had to make those trades while tired, hungry, and cold. Cold was always present in the background, and it influenced every plan, especially the parts of life that were not hunting. Clothing had to be good enough to reduce heat loss, because if it was loose and let wind in, people would shiver more, and shivering burns energy that you cannot get back. Wet clothing was worse, because moisture pulls heat away from the body faster, and if a person got soaked and could not dry quickly, that could become an emergency. Shelter mattered for the same reason. A campsite had to reduce wind exposure, but it also had to avoid the natural paths animals used, because setting up directly beside a herd route could be dangerous, especially at night when visibility was low. Fire had to be maintained constantly, and that required fuel, which meant people had to leave safety to gather it, sometimes in bad conditions, and those fuel trips were not calm errands, because a short walk in the wrong direction could put someone in the wrong place at the wrong time. Night was when fear and planning met each other. Temperatures dropped, and people had to keep the fire alive, because fire provided heat and light, and it helped discourage some predators. The group also had to think about sound, because a herd moving nearby could create noise that warned them, but it could also mean danger was approaching. If a herd panicked at night, a stampede could rush through an area without warning, and a sleeping camp could be crushed before anyone fully woke up. This is why people had to choose camp locations carefully, and why they likely preferred spots that offered visibility and a way to move quickly if necessary. They also had to manage the human side of survival, because children needed comfort, elders needed care, and people needed rest. But rest is difficult when you are cold and you know there are predators in the dark. How do you sleep deeply when you know a wrong sound might mean you have to move immediately? This is also where human teamwork becomes part of the Ice Age story in a way that is easy to overlook. Giant beasts were not something one person could safely handle alone, and even daily survival tasks worked better with coordination. Someone needed to watch, someone needed to tend the fire, and someone needed to check supplies. And these roles mattered because they reduced mistakes. Sharing food mattered too, because a group that fought over resources would split, and a smaller group would have a harder time hunting, defending a kill, and caring for injured people. Rules and habits likely formed around these needs, not because people loved rules, but because the environment forced them to solve the same problems repeatedly. When life is that hard, cooperation is not a nice idea. It is a practical requirement, and groups that coordinated better would last longer. So life in the Ice Age near giant beasts was not just a series of heroic hunts. It was a daily routine built around caution, planning, and constant problem-solving in a cold world where large animals controlled movement and attracted danger. People had to read the land, stay out of the wrong paths, choose when to hunt and when to wait, process food quickly, move supplies safely, keep warm, and protect each other. all while knowing that injuries and weather could end everything fast. That is what makes this period so intense, because the threat was not only the animal in front of you, it was the full set of decisions that had to be right often enough for you to reach the next season. If you want more history videos that focus on what life actually felt like, subscribe, because this channel is about the real daily experience behind the famous scenes. Now let me ask you something. If you lived in that world, what would you worry about most? Getting too close to a herd, losing a kill to predators, or simply trying to stay warm enough to think clearly every single day?